The dust in Fairden had a way of getting everywhere. It clung to the hems of cloaks, settled into the creases of old wood, and coated the back of your throat no matter how many times you swallowed. I had grown used to it over the years. 37 years of living at the edge of things will do that to a man. I repaired carts and mended wheels behind the old stable, ate when I had coin, and kept to myself because most people in this border town had already decided what they thought of quiet men who worked with their hands. That afternoon I stood outside the tavern with a tankard of thin ale, letting the sun press against my shoulders while I watched the street. The place was busy enough for a Thursday. Merchants arguing over prices, children darting between legs, the usual clatter of hooves and voices. I was halfway through the drink when I heard a woman's voice rise above all of it. Not a scream, a shout, sharp and angry. In the middle of the road, a tall figure stood with her back half turned to me, clutching a worn leather pouch tight against her chest. Green skin caught the light where her sleeve had torn. An orc woman. She wore a faded blue dress that had once been finer than it looked now, and her dark hair had come loose from whatever had been holding it. In front of her, a man in a rough cloak and a strip of cloth across his face held a short blade low and ready. "Hand it over," he said, loud enough for half the street to hear. "Now." She didn't move. Her fingers only tightened around the pouch. I set the tankard down on the barrel beside me, already shifting my weight to step forward, but before I could take 2 strides, she swung the pouch in a hard, clean arc. It caught the man across the side of the head with a solid crack. He staggered, cursing, and the whole street seemed to freeze for half a second. Then he lunged. She met him head-on. No running, no pleading. She drove her knee up into his stomach and followed with an elbow that snapped his head back. He grabbed for her wrist, twisting hard. She snarled. Something I didn't catch and drove her forehead into his nose. Blood sprayed across the dust. They crashed together, rolling once, twice, her dress tearing further at the shoulder, his mask slipping askew. Someone in the crowd muttered, "Orc, bitch!" Another voice answered, lower. Should have known better than to walk alone. No one moved to help. Not the merchants, not the guards loitering near the well, not the old woman clutching her basket 2 steps away from me. They watched like it was street theater put on for their amusement. The cloth finally fell from the man's face. I knew him. Bren Callow, one of the town watch under the magistrate's command. He realized the moment it happened. His eyes went wide, and he shoved the woman hard enough to send her sprawling. Then he was up and running, disappearing down the narrow alley between the tanner and the grain store before anyone could call his name. The orc woman stayed on the ground for a moment, breathing hard. A thin line of blood ran from the corner of her mouth. She touched it with the back of her hand, looked at the red smear, and spat into the dust. Then she pushed herself up, slow and steady, and began gathering the few things that had spilled from the pouch. A folded paper, a small brass token, a length of faded ribbon. She collected each one without hurry, as though the watching crowd did not exist. When everything was back inside the pouch, she straightened, squared her shoulders, and started walking again. Not toward the tavern, not toward the stable. Just forward, along the road that led out of town, her chin lifted, her stride even, despite the limp that had appeared in her left leg. I watched her go until she turned the corner past the cooper's shop and disappeared from sight. A quiet laugh left me before I could stop it, low, almost to myself. That was the kind of woman I liked. Not the ones who waited for rescue, not the ones who cried for pity or offered soft words to make men feel strong. This one had stood in the middle of the street, bleeding, outnumbered, and still chosen to fight for whatever she carried in that pouch. She hadn't asked for help. She hadn't expected it. And when it was over, she had simply kept walking, as if the opinions of an entire town meant less to her than the weight of that small leather bag against her ribs. I picked up my tankard again. The ale had gone warm. Around me, the street was already returning to its usual rhythm, people pretending they hadn't just watched a woman nearly lose everything while they did nothing. I stayed where I was, a little longer, turning the moment over in my mind. I didn't know her name. I didn't know what was worth fighting for inside that pouch. I only knew that most people in Fairden would have handed it over the second steel came out. She hadn't, and that, more than anything else I had seen in a long time, made me want to know what kind of woman could walk away from a fight like that with her back still straight and her eyes still clear. The rain hadn't started yet, but the sky over Fairden had turned the color of old iron. I was walking toward the iron hoof stable to fetch a spoke shave I'd left there the day before when I saw her again. She stood beside a battered cart near the open doors, one hand still gripping that same leather pouch against her side. The rear wheel on the left was ruined. Someone had taken a blade to the spokes, cutting deep enough that the wheel would never turn again without a full replacement. It wasn't an accident. The cuts were too clean, too deliberate. She noticed me before I spoke. Her shoulders tightened and she shifted her weight, ready to move if she had to. The bruise on her cheek from the fight that morning had already started to darken. "Bent wheel won't get you far," I said, keeping my voice even. I stopped a few paces away so she wouldn't feel cornered. She turned fully toward me. Her eyes were sharp, the color of wet moss after a storm. "I don't remember asking for your opinion. I'm not offering one, just saying what I see." I nodded at the wheel. "Name's Garrick. I fix carts and mend wood. If you want, I can have that wheel right by morning." She studied me for a long moment, the way a person studies a dog they're not sure will bite. After the morning's trouble, I couldn't blame her for the caution. "The owner here knows me," I added. "He'll tell you I don't overcharge or take what isn't mine." As if summoned, the stable master stepped out from the shadows inside, wiping his hands on a rag. He gave her a short nod. "Garrick's good with his hands. Better than most in this town. If he says he'll fix it, he will." She looked between us, then back at the broken wheel. The first drops of rain began to patter against the stable roof. She had maybe a day's walk left to wherever she was going, and now she had no working cart and a storm coming. "Fine," she said at last, "but I pay for the work. I don't take charity." "I don't give it," I answered. "We're square on that." She stepped aside so I could get a closer look at the damage. While I checked the axle and measured what I would need, she stayed close, never more than an arm's length from the pouch. I didn't ask what was inside, not yet, but the question sat between us like an uninvited guest. "You fought well this morning," I said after a while, keeping my eyes on the wheel. "Most would have given the pouch up the second the knife came out." "Most people have more to lose than I do," she replied. Her voice was low, rough around the edges from the fight. "Or less they're willing to bleed for." I glanced up. She was watching the road, not me. The rain was getting heavier now, drumming on the thatch above us. "Whatever's in there," I said quietly, "must be worth more than coin." She didn't answer right away. Her fingers tightened on the leather again, the same way they had when the masked man tried to take it. "Sometimes it's not about what something is worth," she said. "It's about what happens if you lose it. If I lose this, I have nowhere left to go back to." I didn't push. I just nodded and went back to work. She watched me for a while longer, then finally sat on an overturned crate near the wall, still holding the pouch in her lap like it might disappear if she let go. The rain turned into a steady downpour. Water ran in thin streams off the stable roof and pooled in the yard outside. I kept working under the shelter of the overhang, replacing the worst of the spokes and checking the iron rim. She didn't speak again for a long time. Then, without looking at me, she said, "You didn't have to offer." "I know. Most men in this town would have walked past, or waited to see if I lost. I'm not most men in this town." She gave a short, almost bitter laugh. "No, you're not." I finished tightening the new spokes and tested the wheel's turn. It would hold until I could get proper wood for a full replacement. When I looked up again, she was still watching the rain, but some of the tension had left her shoulders. Across the street, half hidden under the eaves of the grain store, 3 figures stood watching the stable. One of them was Bren Callow. Even from this distance, I could see the fresh bruise across his face where her pouch had struck him. The other 2 were men I didn't recognize, but their posture said they weren't there for idle talk. I wiped my hands on my trousers and spoke low enough that only she could hear. "We have company, the kind that doesn't come with good intentions." She followed my gaze. When she saw Bren, her jaw tightened. "He wants more than the pouch now," she said. "He wants what's inside it, and he won't stop just because he got caught once." I set the spokeshave down. "Then we don't give him another chance tonight." She looked at me, really looked, as though weighing whether I was another problem or the first person in this town who hadn't turned away when things got difficult. The rain was coming down hard enough now that the yard had turned to mud. Lightning flashed somewhere beyond the hills. "You should come inside," I said. "Stable's dry enough and there's a loft. If you need to rest, I'll finish the wheel by first light." She hesitated only a moment before nodding. We moved deeper into the stable, away from the open doors and the eyes across the street. She chose a spot near the back wall where she could still see the entrance, the pouch never leaving her side. I lit a small oil lamp and went back to work. The sound of the rain on the roof filled the space between us. After a while, she spoke again, quieter this time. My father gave me this pouch before he died. Said if I ever had to leave, I should keep what was inside it close. I didn't think I would ever have to use it this way. I didn't ask what was inside, not yet. But I listened. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, for the first time since that morning, she stopped gripping the pouch quite so tightly. She set it on her lap instead of clutching it to her chest, though her hand stayed resting on the leather. I kept working on the wheel, slow and steady, while the storm passed over Ferden. Neither of us said much more that night, but she stayed. And when the lamp burned low and the rain finally eased toward dawn, she was still there, sitting with her back against the wall, eyes half closed but never fully asleep. I finished the last spoke just as the first gray light touched the stable doors. She opened her eyes when I stood up. "Wheel's ready," I said. "You can leave whenever you want." She looked at the cart, then at me. For a moment I thought she might simply nod, climb up, and drive away without another word. Instead she asked, "Why are you helping me?" I met her gaze. "Because you didn't ask for it, and because I've seen what happens to people who fight alone in this town. It rarely ends well." She studied me for a long time. Then, very quietly, she said, "My name is Velra." It was the first time she had offered it. I gave a small nod. "Garrick, already told you that." A faint, tired smile touched the corner of her mouth. It didn't last long, but it was real. Outside, the rain had stopped. The street was quiet again, but both of us knew the quiet wouldn't last. The sky was still dark when I finished checking the cart one last time. The new wheel sat true on the axle, and the rain had left the ground soft but not flooded. Velra stood near the stable doors, the pouch once again strapped across her body instead of clutched in her hands. She had slept little. I could see it in the way she held herself, shoulders tight, eyes scanning the yard even though nothing moved yet. She turned when she heard me approach. "You should go," I said, "before the town wakes and decides to make yesterday's trouble your problem again." Velra looked at the cart, then back at me. For a moment I thought she would simply climb up and drive away. Instead she asked, "Do you want to know what's inside?" I wiped my hands on a rag. "Only if you want to tell me." She was quiet for a long breath. Then she reached into the pouch and drew out 3 things. A folded sheet of thick paper with a cracked wax seal, a smaller letter written on thin parchment, and a rolled piece of oiled cloth that looked like a map. "My family's land," she said. "A strip beside the Don Run stream, half a day's ride from here. My parents held it after the last border war. They died 2 winters ago. My sister married and moved west. The land should have passed to me." She unfolded the letter first. The handwriting was careful but tired. "If you keep the land, you keep our name," she read aloud. Her voice stayed steady, but her fingers trembled slightly on the edge of the paper. "That's what my father wrote before he died. He knew someone would try to take it." I waited. "Under the meadow there's fresh water," she continued. "A spring that doesn't run dry even in the worst summers. The magistrate Malrek Dern found out. He wants the water for the livestock traders who pay him. If he controls the spring, he controls the price of water for half the border farms." She held up the sealed document. "This is the legal claim. My father registered it properly with the old scribe. Malrek can't touch the land while this exists, so he sent Bren to steal it instead of taking it openly." I looked at the papers, then at her face. The bruise on her cheek had darkened to a deep purple. "You fought a man with a knife for a piece of land," I said. "I fought for the only thing left that proves I still have a place in this world," she answered. "If I lose these, I have nothing. No home. No proof I ever belonged anywhere." The stable was quiet except for the soft shifting of horses in their stalls. Outside, the first birds were beginning to call. I made my decision before I finished thinking it through. "There's an old scribe 2 days from here," I said. "Oren. He used to keep the land records for the whole region before Malrek took over. If anyone can confirm these papers are real and help you bring it before the council, it's him." Velra studied me. You don't have to come." "I already fixed your wheel," I said. "If you get killed before you reach him, the work was wasted." A small, tired smile touched her mouth. It was the second time I had seen it. We left before the sun rose, the cart rolling quietly over the wet road. Velra drove, while I rode beside on an old gelding the stablemaster lent me. We spoke little at first. The morning was cold, and the road empty. By midday we had left the last farms behind and entered the stretch of forest that ran between Ferden and the hills. She told me more as we traveled. How her mother had taught her to read the old maps. How her father had refused to sell the land even when offers came. How Malrek had begun sending men to persuade them after her parents died. She had been working at a forge in another town when word reached her that the magistrate was moving to claim the land as abandoned. "I came back for the papers," she said. "I thought if I moved quietly, I could reach the scribe before Malrek realized I was here." "He realized," I answered. Night fell before we reached Oren's village. We made camp in a small clearing just off the road. Valra built a small fire while I checked the cart and the horse. She kept the pouch beside her the entire time. We ate in silence for a while, then she spoke without looking up from the flames. "You could still turn back tomorrow. This isn't your fight." "I know," I said, "but I've already seen what Malrek does to people who stand in his way. I'd rather not watch it happen again." She didn't answer, but she didn't argue either. We took turns keeping watch. I had the first shift. Around the middle of the night, I woke her so I could sleep. She sat with her back against a tree, the iron bar from the broken wheel resting across her knees. I fell asleep listening to the fire crackle and the sound of her steady breathing. We were hitching the horse to the cart before dawn when they came. 3 shadows moved out from the trees on the far side of the clearing. Bren walked in front, his face still swollen from yesterday. The 2 men with him carried short swords and moved like they had done this kind of work before. "Hand over the papers," Bren said. His voice was hoarse. "Do it now, and you both walk away." Valra stepped down from the cart without hesitation. She picked up the iron bar. I reached for the heavy woodworking hammer I had brought from the stable. Bren smiled without humor. "Last chance, orc." She didn't answer with words. The first man rushed her. She met him with the bar, knocking his sword aside and driving the end into his ribs. He went down, gasping. The second came at me. I swung the hammer low and caught him across the thigh. Bone cracked. He dropped with a scream. Bren lunged at Velra. She twisted away, but his blade caught her forearm, slicing through cloth and skin. She hissed in pain, but didn't drop the bar. I moved in from the side and brought the hammer down on his shoulder. He staggered, turned, and slashed at me. The blade opened a line across my ribs, shallow but hot. Valra stepped between us and drove the iron bar into Bren's stomach. He folded. Before he could recover, she hit him again across the back of the head. He went down into the mud and didn't get up. The man I had hit was trying to crawl away. The one Velra had struck first lay still, breathing but not moving. Voices shouted from the road. The stablemaster from Ferden appeared with 2 other men from town who had been traveling the same route. They had heard the fight. When they saw Bren on the ground and the drawn weapons, the story became clear enough. Bren tried to stand. One of the travelers put a boot on his back and kept him there. Valra stood over him, breathing hard, blood running down her arm. She looked at the papers still safe inside the pouch, then at me. I was pressing a hand against the cut on my side. It wasn't deep, but it stung. She didn't thank me with words. She simply nodded once, short and firm. We were no longer strangers. The travelers bound Bren and the other 2. Someone went to fetch help from the nearest village. Valra cleaned and wrapped her arm while I checked the cart. The wheel held. The horse was unharmed. When the sun finally broke through the trees, we stood beside the cart together. The fight was over. The papers were still with us. And for the first time since I had seen her in the street, I knew we would finish this road together. The road after the ambush felt longer than it should have. We left the clearing as soon as the travelers finished binding Bren and the other 2 men. One of them offered to ride ahead and report what happened, but Valra shook her head. "We keep moving," she said. "The longer we stay here, the more time Malrek has to send others." I didn't argue. My ribs still stung where Bren's blade had caught me. But the cut was shallow. Valra's forearm was wrapped in a strip of clean cloth torn from her own sleeve. She climbed onto the cart without help and took the reins herself. I rode beside her on the gelding, close enough to watch the trees, but far enough that she wouldn't feel crowded. She drove for the first half of the morning without speaking. The forest grew thicker as we moved north. Sunlight came down in narrow shafts between the branches, and the road turned soft from yesterday's rain. Twice she had to guide the cart around deep ruts. She handled the horse with steady hands, never once asking me to take over. Around midday, we stopped beside a narrow stream to water the horse. Velra knelt and washed the dried blood from her arm. I stood a few paces away, giving her space. "You don't have to prove anything to me," I said quietly. She looked up, water dripping from her fingers. "I'm not proving anything, I just don't like being treated like I'll break if someone else holds the reins." I nodded. Fair enough. She studied me for a moment, then offered the reins when we started moving again. I took them without comment. We switched every few hours after that. It became a quiet rhythm between us. As the afternoon wore on, the silence between us changed. It was no longer the careful silence of strangers. She began to speak, at first about small things, Gayawag, the way the light moved through the trees, the sound of the stream we had crossed earlier. Then the words went deeper. "My mother used to say I was born with a spine too straight for a woman," she said. "Even when I was small, people told me to lower my eyes and soften my voice. I never learned how." I kept my gaze on the road ahead. "Sounds like they were afraid of you even then." She gave a short laugh. "They were afraid I wouldn't marry the first man who offered protection. My father never pushed me. He said the land would be mine one day and I should decide what to do with it. After he died, the offers came faster. Men who wanted the water rights more than they wanted me." I glanced at her. "You turned them down." "Everyone. I'd rather work a forge than lie beside a man who sees me as a deed to sign." We rode in silence for a while after that. The only sounds were the creak of the cart and the steady clop of hooves. Later, when the light began to fade, I told her about my own past without being asked. "My father was a wheelwright too," I said. "Taught me everything before he died. I had a girl once, years ago. She left when she realized I would never be more than a man who fixed other people's carts. She wanted someone who could give her a house in town and a name that mattered." Velra was quiet for a long time. "People like to decide what someone is worth before they've ever lived their life," she said finally. I looked over at her. She was watching the road, but her words settled somewhere deep in my chest. That night the rain returned, sudden and heavy. We had just crossed an old stone bridge when the sky opened. There was no time to reach the next village. I spotted a small, abandoned watch house, half hidden among the trees, and pointed toward it. We got the cart and horse under the sagging roof just as the downpour turned the road to mud. Inside, a single room smelled of damp wood and old smoke. Velra built a small fire in the stone hearth while I secured the horse. When the flames finally caught, she sat on the floor with her back against the wall and pulled her father's letter from the pouch. She read it again by the firelight, though I could tell she already knew every word by heart. Her shoulders were tight. For the first time since I had met her, she looked smaller than her height, and strength suggested. I sat down a short distance away, close enough to feel the warmth of the fire, but not so close that I crowded her. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore," I said. She didn't look up from the letter. "I've carried it since the day he died. I know, but you don't have to anymore." Her fingers tightened on the paper. "If I lose this land, I lose the last thing that connects me to them, to who I was supposed to be." I shook my head. "You don't need the land to prove who you are. You already proved it the day you fought a man with a knife in the middle of the street, and again yesterday when you stood your ground instead of running." She finally looked at me. The firelight caught in her eyes. "You always speak like things are simple," she said, voice low. "They're not," I answered. "But you've been fighting so long, you've forgotten you're allowed to rest sometimes." She didn't reply with words. Instead, she shifted closer, just enough that her shoulder almost touched mine. Not quite, but near enough that I could feel the warmth of her through the damp air. We stayed like that for a long time, listening to the rain hammer on the roof and the fire crackle between us. Neither of us slept much that night. The next morning, the rain had stopped. We reached Oren's small house by mid-afternoon. The old scribe was exactly as I remembered him, thin, sharp-eyed, and slower than he used to be, but still clear in the mind. He took the documents into his hands with careful fingers and studied each one under the light from his window. After a long silence, he nodded. "These are genuine," he said. "The seal is real. The registration is in the old books. Malrek has no legal claim while these exist. Valra let out a breath she had been holding since we arrived. Orin looked at her over the top of his spectacles. But he will not give up easily. He will try to paint you as a liar or a thief before the council. An orc woman holding strategic land will make many uncomfortable. I will stand before them, Valra said. Her voice was steady again. I stepped forward, and I will stand with her. Orin studied me for a moment, then gave a small, knowing nod. When we stepped outside afterward, Valra walked a few paces ahead before stopping. She turned to face me. "Why do you keep staying?" she asked. There was no challenge in her voice this time, only quiet curiosity. I met her eyes. "At first it was the wheel," I said. "Then it was because I've seen what happens when good people are left to fight alone. But now—" I paused, choosing the words carefully. "Now it's because of you." Color rose along the edges of her ears, visible even against the green of her skin. She looked away, but she didn't step back. We stood there in the fading light, the papers safe inside the pouch once more, and the road to the council still ahead of us. For the first time, the silence between us felt like something we had chosen, rather than something we were forced to carry. The council hall in Highford was built of pale stone and old timber, with high windows that let in cold morning light. Benches lined both sides of the long room. At the far end sat 3 lords and 2 magistrates behind a heavy oak table. Malrek Dern stood before them in a fine dark coat trimmed with silver thread, his voice smooth and confident as he spoke. "The documents are forged," he said, gesturing toward Valra without looking at her. "An orc woman living alone has no rightful claim to land that controls a vital water source. She is trying to steal what belongs to the region." Valra stood straight in the center of the floor. She wore the same faded blue dress she had fought in days earlier, now cleaned and mended. The leather pouch rested against her hip. She did not raise her voice when she answered. "I am not asking for land that belongs to anyone else," she said. "I am keeping what my father registered before he died. If I were weak, I would have given the pouch to the man who tried to rob me in the street. If I were dishonest, I would have run instead of coming here, but I am standing in front of you because these papers are real." She placed the sealed document, her father's letter, and the map on the table one by one. The lords leaned forward to examine them. I stepped forward when it was my turn to speak. I told them about the morning I saw her fight a masked man in the middle of Ferden. I told them how the man's face was revealed and how I recognized him as Bren Callow, one of Malrek's own guards. I described the broken wheel on her cart and the clear cuts in the spokes. I described the ambush before dawn, the 3 men who came out of the trees, and how Bren had demanded the papers again. The stablemaster from Ferden spoke next. He confirmed he had seen Bren watching the stable that night and had heard the fight when we were attacked on the road. Orin, the old scribe, confirmed that the documents matched the records he had kept for decades. When they brought Bren in bound and limping, the hall grew very quiet. He stood before the table with his head down and admitted in a low voice that Malrek had ordered him to take the pouch by any means necessary. Malrek's face changed color. He tried to speak, but one of the lords raised a hand and silenced him. The decision came quickly after that. Malrek Dern was removed from his position before the sun reached its highest point. The lords ordered the papers returned to Velra and declared the land beside the Dawnrun stream legally hers. Bren and the men who had served Malrek were taken into custody. When we stepped outside the hall, the sky was clear and cold. Valra stood on the stone steps, holding the pouch against her chest with both hands. She looked down at it for a long moment, then turned to me. "I kept the land," she said. I shook my head. "No, you won it back." She studied my face. There was no smile yet, but something softer had settled in her eyes. "You will return to Ferden now?" she asked. I looked at the road that led south, then back at her. If I wanted to stay near Dawnrun instead, I said, to mend fences and repair stables and maybe a few cartwheels. Would that be welcome? Valra was quiet for a breath. Then the corner of her mouth lifted, small and real. "I would pay you fairly," she answered. "I would expect nothing less." We left Highford that afternoon. The journey back to the land took 3 days. We traveled slowly this time. There was no longer any need to rush. Months passed. The small house near the stream was simple, with thick walls and a roof I repaired before the first snow. Valra worked the meadow during the day and kept the old pouch on a shelf above the hearth. One evening, After we had eaten, she took it down and placed it on the wooden table between us. I used to believe the most important thing I would ever own was inside this pouch, she said. I waited. She looked at me across the table. Now I think the most valuable thing is the person who helped me keep it. I reached across and took her hand. Her fingers were calloused from work, warm and steady. Velra, I said. I don't have gold or a fine name, but I have two hands that can still fix what's broken and protect what matters. If you want me to stay here with you, I will. She turned her hand in mine so our palms pressed together. Stay, she answered, but don't think I will let you do all the fixing alone. I smiled. I already knew that the day you fought a man in the street for what was yours. Outside, the stream moved steadily past the meadow. Inside, the fire burned low. The pouch sat on the table between us, no longer the most important thing in the room. It had started with dust and shouting and a woman who refused to hand over what belonged to her. Most people in Fairden had seen only an orc who fought too hard. I had seen something else. I had seen the woman I wanted to stand beside for the rest of my life.